Candlelight danced across crystal glasses as I held my grandson Leo's small hand at table 8. The wedding reception buzzed around us, but Leo looked pale and tired. He leaned close to my ear, his whisper barely audible over the live band. "Grandma, don't forget to look under the vase." My heart jumped. What an odd thing for a 7-year-old to say. I glanced at the heavy floral centerpiece in front of us, white roses and baby's breath arranged perfectly. Leo's eyes were serious, more serious than any child should be. I lifted the vase carefully, my hands shaking slightly. Taped to the bottom was a small square of paper. I peeled it off and read the neat handwriting. T8, add peanut oil to child's entree. My blood turned cold. Leo was severely allergic to shellfish. His EpiPen was in my purse, but even with it, exposure could be deadly. This wasn't an accident or mistake. Someone had planned this. Someone wanted to hurt my grandson. The band played louder as servers began approaching our table with covered plates, their silver domes hiding whatever lay beneath. I jumped up from my chair and intercepted the nearest server before he could reach Leo. "Wait," I said, grabbing the young man's arm. He looked startled as I lifted the silver dome from the child's plate. There, nestled under creamy mashed potatoes, were pink peanut oil tails. I knocked the fork from Leo's hand just as he was about to take his first bite. The server stared at me in confusion. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" he asked. My hands trembled as I showed him the note I'd found under the vase. "My grandson has a severe shellfish allergy. This could have killed him." The server's face went white. "I'm so sorry. I just followed the special instructions we received." Before I could ask more questions, a bright, melodious voice floated over us. "Is everything all right, Mother?" It was Andrea, my son's new bride, gliding toward us in her beautiful white gown. Her smile was perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked like an angel, but something cold flickered in her blue eyes as she looked down at the evidence spread across our table. With shaking hands, I showed Martin, my son and the groom, the taped note and the peanut oil-laden plate. His face drained of color as he read the message. "What is this?" he asked, his voice tight. Andrea stepped closer, her wedding dress rustling softly. She glanced at the note and laughed lightly, a sound like wind chimes. "Oh my goodness, what a tasteless prank. Someone must be playing a cruel joke." Her smile never wavered, not even for a second. Martin looked between his new wife and me, torn and confused. "Who would do something like this?" he asked. I could see him struggling, wanting to believe this was all some misunderstanding. The other guests at nearby tables had started to notice the commotion. Conversations quieted as people turned to stare at table 8. The wedding photographer stopped taking pictures. Leo tugged on my sleeve and I bent down to hear him. His small voice was barely a whisper. "Grandma, she told me not to tell." My heart stopped. I looked up at Andrea, whose perfect smile finally flickered for just a moment before returning to its radiant brightness. I knelt down to Leo's level, my heart pounding. "What did the pretty lady tell you not to tell, sweetheart?" I asked gently. Leo glanced nervously at Andrea, then whispered in my ear. "She said surprises get ruined when little boys talk too much. She said I should keep secrets like big boys do." My stomach dropped to my feet. This was textbook manipulation, grooming a child to stay silent. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling weak. "When did she tell you this, Leo?" She pointed to earlier in the evening, when everyone was taking pictures outside. Andrea's laugh tinkled again. "Children have such active imaginations, don't they? Poor little thing must be confused with all the excitement." But I saw something different in her eyes now, a coldness that made my skin crawl. A server approached hesitantly, holding a piece of paper. "Excuse me," he said to me quietly. "I found this near your table. It looks like another copy of those special dietary instructions." His hands shook as he handed it to me. It was identical to the note from under the vase, same handwriting, same deadly request. I followed the server toward the kitchen area, my pulse racing. His name tag read Marco, and his hands trembled as he led me into a quiet corridor away from the reception. "Please don't get me in trouble," he begged. I was just following orders. I assured him I only wanted the truth. Marco wiped sweat from his forehead with a napkin. "A woman in a satin wrap came up to me about an hour ago. She handed me that paper with the special instructions and said it was very important for table 8. She seemed so nice and official." He paused, glancing around nervously. Then I dropped the copy you found. I was so scared I'd get fired. I felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together. What did this woman look like? I asked. Marco described someone who could have been Andrea, but the wedding veil and dim lighting made it hard to be certain. She's right there, he whispered, pointing back toward the ballroom where I could see Andrea's younger sister Ivy walking toward us. Ivy looked upset, her eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. My heart started beating faster. Was Ivy involved too? I approached Ivy carefully, not wanting to scare her. Ivy, honey, did you help pass any notes to the kitchen staff tonight? I asked gently. Her face crumpled and tears spilled down her cheeks. She nodded miserably. Andrea asked me to do her a quick favor. She said it was about making sure everyone's meals were perfect. Ivy pulled out a tissue and dabbed her eyes. She gave me a folded paper to give to one of the servers. I didn't read it, I swear. I thought it was just wedding stuff. My heart ached for this young girl who had been used without knowing it. Did she say anything else? Ivy shook her head. Just that it was important and I shouldn't mention it to anyone because it was supposed to be a surprise. Before I could ask more questions, Andrea appeared beside us like a ghost, her white dress flowing behind her. Ladies, gossiping so soon after the ceremony? She asked with that same bright smile. But her voice had an edge to it now, sharp as a blade. Her eyes moved from Ivy's tear-stained face to me, calculating and cold. Is there something wrong? I placed the peanut oil-covered plate and the note side by side on a nearby cocktail table. Andrea, someone tried to poison my grandson tonight. The words hung in the air like smoke. Andrea looked down at the evidence and laughed, the sound light and carefree. Oh my goodness, this is clearly just kitchen incompetence. These caterers are so careless sometimes. She slipped her arm through Martin's, pulling him close. Darling, you know how restaurants mix up orders all the time. Martin looked confused and exhausted. But Mom found this note under our table's centerpiece, he said weakly. Andrea waved a dismissive hand. Someone from the kitchen staff probably dropped it there by mistake. These people aren't very careful. But her explanation didn't account for Leo's warning or the way she'd told him to keep secrets. Across the ballroom, I saw Letty, my adopted daughter, rise from her chair. Her face was pale with fury as she took in the scene. Leo had wrapped himself around her leg when the commotion started. Letty's jaw was set in a way I recognized. She was done being quiet. Letty strode across the ballroom and positioned herself between Leo and Andrea like a shield. Her voice carried across the reception hall, clear and strong. This was planned, she announced to the room. Conversations stopped. The band faltered mid-song. Guests turned to stare at us, wine glasses frozen halfway to their lips. Andrea's perfect composure finally cracked just a little. That's ridiculous, she said, but her voice was higher now, strained. Martin stepped between his new wife and his adopted sister. Please, let's just calm down and figure this out quietly, he pleaded. But Letty wasn't backing down. Check the security cameras, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Right now. If this was just a kitchen mistake, the cameras will prove it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several guests pulled out their phones. The wedding photographer started taking pictures again. Andrea's hand tightened on Martin's arm. Darling, if you love me, you'll put a stop to this embarrassing scene, she whispered, but her words carried in the suddenly quiet room. Every eye in the place was on us now. The event manager appeared at our sides, looking flustered. I explained what had happened while showing him the evidence. His face grew grim as he read the note and saw the peanut oil on Leo's plate. We absolutely have security cameras, he said. I can review the footage immediately. Guests began to whisper among themselves, the festive mood completely shattered. The band stopped playing entirely. Andrea maintained her smile, but I could see desperation creeping into her eyes. This is our wedding day, she said to the manager. Can't we handle this privately? But the manager was already on his radio, calling for the security office to be opened. As we moved toward the back of the venue, I heard Andrea lean close to Martin's ear. If you truly love me, you'll stop this right now, she hissed. Don't you trust your own wife? Martin's face was torn with anguish. He'd waited so long to find love, and now on his wedding day, everything was falling apart. Leo held tight to Letty's hand, his small face serious beyond his years. The group of us walked toward the security office like a funeral procession, the weight of truth hanging over us all. In the cramped security office, we huddled around monitors showing different camera angles of the reception. The manager fast-forwarded through the footage, looking for the moments that mattered. "There," I said, pointing at the screen. The timestamp showed footage from earlier in the evening. We watched as Ivy accepted a folded piece of paper from someone in a white dress just outside the kitchen area. Later, the cameras caught Ivy handing that same paper to Marco. "This confirms what Ivy and Marco told us," Letty said quietly. Andrea studied the screen with narrowed eyes. "The video quality is terrible," she complained. "You can barely see anyone's face clearly." But the timeline was damning. The manager continued scanning through the footage, looking for more evidence. "Wait," he said suddenly. "Look at this." On another camera angle, we watched as a figure approached table 8 during the cocktail hour when most guests were outside for photos. The person was dressed in white, partially obscured by other guests, but we could clearly see them lifting the floral centerpiece. The timestamp matched perfectly with when Leo said he'd been told to keep secrets. We all stared at the screen in stunned silence. Frame by frame, we watched the figure at table 8. The person wore white satin gloves and moved carefully, lifting the vase and placing something underneath before setting it back down. The wedding veil and positioning made it impossible to see the person's face clearly, but the dress details were unmistakable. "The beadwork on the bodice?" Letty said, pointing at the screen. "Look at that pattern." We all turned to look at Andrea's dress. The intricate beading matched exactly what we saw on the security footage. Andrea stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open. Then she quickly recovered. "Anyone could have borrowed my wrap or copied my dress style," she said desperately. "Lots of people had access to the bridal suite today." But her voice lacked conviction now. The evidence was mounting, and everyone in the room could feel it. Martin sat heavily in a chair, his head in his hands. "I don't understand," he mumbled. "Why would anyone want to hurt Leo?" The question hung in the air like a dark cloud. Leo was just a little boy, innocent and sweet. What possible motive could anyone have for targeting a child? We returned to the reception hall, where anxious guests waited in clusters. I picked up a water glass and tapped it with a spoon, the crystal ringing clearly across the room. The remaining conversations died instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I need to share something with you all." I held up the note and gestured to Leo's tampered plate. "Someone deliberately tried to poison my grandson tonight. We have security footage showing the person who planted evidence under our table's centerpiece." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several people stood up to get a better look. Andrea stepped forward with a bright smile that looked increasingly unnatural. "I think Ruth is understandably upset and confused," she announced to the room. "But I need to tell you all something important about our family dynamics." Her voice took on a concerned, sympathetic tone. "I'm actually trying to protect Martin from his adopted daughter Letty, who has been obsessed with him for years. This whole thing is probably her desperate attempt to ruin our wedding day." The accusation hit like a thunderbolt. Letty's face went white with shock and anger. The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs as Andrea's accusation hung in the air. But Letty was ready. She pulled out her phone with steady hands. "I've been texting with Leo's babysitter all evening," she announced clearly. "Every message is time-stamped." She held up her phone screen for people to see. "I have an alibi for every single moment shown in that security footage." Her voice grew stronger. "I was never near table 8 during the time that note was planted." She scrolled through message after message, showing the continuous conversation with the babysitter about bedtime routines and homework. The timestamps aligned perfectly, proving she couldn't have been the figure in white on the cameras. Andrea's face began to flush red beneath her makeup. "Phone records can be faked," she said weakly, but no one was buying it anymore. Ivy stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Andrea, please just tell the truth," she begged her sister. "I can't keep this secret anymore. I saw you writing something in the bridal suite. You said it was for dietary corrections, but you made me promise not to tell anyone." The room fell deadly silent except for Ivy's quiet sobs. Ivy's confession broke something open. Andrea told me the note was just to make sure everyone got the right food. She continued through her tears. She said some people had special dietary needs and the kitchen needed clear instructions. I never thought. Her voice trailed off as the full horror hit her. I never imagined it was about hurting Leo. Martin's knees buckled and he sank into a chair. Why? He whispered, looking up at his bride with wounded eyes. Why would you want to hurt our child? The question that had been haunting all of us finally hung in the open air. I remembered the past few months, small incidents I'd dismissed at the time. Andrea snapping at Leo when he spilled juice. Her irritation when he wanted to sit between her and Martin. The way she'd roll her eyes when Leo wanted bedtime stories. She wanted him gone, I said quietly, the pieces falling into place. She saw Leo as competition for Martin's attention and love. Andrea's mask was slipping further. Her perfect wedding makeup had started to smudge, and her hands were shaking. You're all conspiring against me, she suddenly shouted. This is my wedding day. I watched the memories flood back, all the small warning signs I'd overlooked. Andrea constantly correcting Leo's manners. Her comments about him being spoiled when he acted like a normal 7-year-old. The way she'd suggested boarding school might be good for him. She'd been systematically trying to push Leo out of Martin's life, and when subtle manipulation didn't work fast enough, she'd escalated to something unthinkable. You wanted Leo out of the picture, I said, my voice growing stronger with certainty. You thought if something happened to him, you'd have Martin all to yourself. Andrea's composure finally shattered completely. He doesn't need that child, she screamed. Martin deserves better than being tied down by someone else's kid. The entire ballroom recoiled at her words. Even people who didn't know our family well could hear the venom in her voice. Letty stepped protectively in front of Leo, whose eyes were wide with fear and confusion. Andrea reached desperately for the incriminating note on the table, trying to destroy the evidence. But Letty was faster, blocking her path. The sound of Andrea's palm connecting with Letty's cheek echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. The slap seemed to freeze time. Champagne glasses trembled on tables. Guests stood with their mouths open. The wedding photographer's camera flashes lit up the scene like lightning. Andrea stood there in her beautiful white dress, hands still raised, her face twisted with rage and desperation. The angelic bride persona had completely vanished. Security guards appeared from different corners of the room, drawn by the commotion. Martin rose from his chair like he was moving underwater. I'm so sorry, Leo, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. He knelt down to his son's level, tears streaming down his face. I should have protected you better. Leo threw his small arms around Martin's neck. It's okay, Daddy, he said softly. Grandma saved me. I looked at Andrea with cold determination. Anyone who tries to hurt my grandson is no longer part of this family, I announced to the room. Security needs to escort her out immediately. The head security guard nodded and moved toward Andrea. She looked around desperately for support, but found only disgusted faces and horrified stares. As the guards reached for her arms, she spun around with wild eyes. You'll regret this, she spat. You need me more than you know. The reception hall began to empty as security escorted Andrea toward the exit doors. Her white dress dragged behind her like a fallen angel's wings. Most guests filed out quietly, whispering among themselves about what they'd witnessed. I wrapped my shawl around Leo's shoulders and made sure his EpiPen was close at hand. Martin sat slumped in his chair, looking like he'd aged 10 years in one night. The wedding cake stood untouched on its table, a monument to what should have been a celebration of love. Letty rubbed her cheek where Andrea had struck her, but her eyes were focused on comforting Leo. We're safe now, she murmured to him. It's over. But as I helped clean up the evidence from our table, I found something that made my blood run cold. Tucked beneath the box of wedding favors was another copy of the peanut oil instruction note. This one was labeled kitchen copy, backup. Andrea had planned for the possibility that her first attempt might be discovered. She'd made sure there would be someone else to blame if things went wrong. The calculated nature of it made me feel sick. This hadn't been a moment of anger or jealousy. It had been cold, premeditated, attempted murder. Later that night, Letty and I sat in my living room while Leo slept safely in the guest bedroom. We spread out all the evidence on my coffee table like detectives working a case. The notes, photos of the tampered food, contact information for Marco and Ivy, everything that told the story of Andrea's plan. "Look at this pattern," Letty said, pointing to incidents we documented over the past few months. The day at the park when Leo got lost and she found him near the pond, her constant criticism that he was too babyish. The way she'd suggest he needed more discipline. Each incident alone had seemed minor, just a stressed woman adjusting to family life. Together, they painted a picture of someone systematically undermining a child's place in his father's heart. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Martin. "Andrea wants to meet me alone tomorrow. She says if I don't come, she'll go public with her side of the story." I showed the message to Letty, who shook her head grimly. "She's not done fighting," she said. "She thinks she can still manipulate him." I felt a chill run down my spine. We weren't safe yet. The next evening, Martin met Andrea in the hotel garden under strings of fairy lights left over from their wedding preparations. I'd convinced him to record the conversation on his phone, though he felt guilty about it. From our hiding spot behind a large planter, Letty and I watched the confrontation unfold. Andrea looked different without her wedding dress and perfect makeup. Smaller somehow, but more dangerous, like a cornered animal. "Martin, sweetheart," she began, her voice honey-sweet again. "I can make all this go away. We just need to get our stories straight." She proposed a deal. Martin would publicly blame a rogue server for the peanut oil incident, claim it was all a misunderstanding. In return, she would forgive my overreaction and we could all move forward as a family. "The authorities don't need to get involved," she said, stepping closer to him. "We can handle this privately. That's what married couples do." Martin held his phone steady, recording every word. "What about Leo?" he asked quietly. "What about the fact that you tried to kill my son?" Andrea's mask slipped again. "It would have been fine," she snapped. "Children recover from these things. A little scare might have taught him some boundaries." Martin's face went white at Andrea's casual dismissal of Leo's near-death experience. "A little scare?" he repeated, his voice rising. "He could have died, Andrea. His allergy is severe." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, please, you're all so dramatic. I researched it online. Most kids just get a rash or upset stomach." The callousness of her words was breathtaking. She'd researched how to poison a child and decided the risk was acceptable. "Besides," she continued, "judges always side with polished, educated women like me. If you try to paint me as the villain, I'll make sure everyone knows how unstable your mother is and how obsessed Letty has always been with you." Martin stared at her in horror as she laid out her plan to destroy our family's reputation. "I have connections, Martin. Good lawyers. I'll make your life hell if you don't cooperate." Suddenly, the garden's sprinkler system activated with a loud whoosh, startling both of them. Water sprayed across the flower beds in wide arcs. Andrea jumped back with a shriek, but in her panic, she dropped her evening clutch. It hit the ground and spilled open, contents scattering across the wet pavement. Martin and I both saw what tumbled out before she could gather it up. Martin knelt down and picked up the items from Andrea's clutch before she could stop him. There was a spare wedding veil folded neatly, a pair of white satin gloves identical to the ones we'd seen in the security footage, and most damning of all, a small piece of paper with a printed menu. It was marked up in Andrea's handwriting, with notes about different dietary restrictions for various tables. Next to table 8, she'd written, "Child, severe shellfish allergy, add peanut oil." It was a trial run, proof she'd planned this carefully and researched Leo's medical condition. "You kept evidence," Martin said in amazement. "You kept proof of what you did." Andrea lunged for the items, but Martin stepped back. "I was being thorough," she said desperately. "I wanted to make sure I understood everyone's needs." But her explanation made no sense. Why would someone planning innocent dietary accommodations bring spare gloves and a veil to change into? "You planned to frame someone else from the beginning," I said, stepping out from behind the planter. "The backup note, the costume changes, everything." Andrea spun around to face me, her eyes wild with panic and rage. "You followed us," she accused. "You set me up." The next morning, I drove the clutch contents and the backup note to the venue manager's office. He examined everything carefully, taking photos and making copies for his incident report. "The police will want to see all of this," he told me. "What she did goes beyond property damage or disrupting an event. This is attempted poisoning of a minor." His statement would become part of the official record, establishing a paper trail that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Meanwhile, Martin filed for annulment of the marriage and contacted the authorities himself. "I married someone I didn't really know," he told me over coffee that morning. "I was so desperate for companionship after Leo's mother passed that I ignored warning signs I should have seen." We sat at my kitchen table, going through everything we'd need for the legal proceedings. Photos of the tampered food, copies of the security footage, witness statements from Marco and Ivy. "The hardest part is knowing Leo was never safe," Martin continued. "All those months she was planning this. Every family dinner, every bedtime story, every hug, she was plotting against him." His voice broke. "How do I forgive myself for bringing her into his life?" By noon, extended family members had started arriving at my house. Some begged us to handle the situation quietly, worried about family reputation and avoiding scandal. "Think about the children," one aunt pleaded. "Do you really want this in the newspapers?" But I stood firm. "Silence nearly killed a child," I told them. "I won't be quiet about attempted murder." Martin backed me up completely. "I'm filing every report necessary," he said, his voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. "No one tries to hurt my son and gets away with it." That afternoon, Leo padded into the kitchen in his pajamas, still drowsy from his nap. He curled up in Letty's lap at the kitchen table, where she was helping organize our evidence files. "Letty," he said quietly, "can you be my mom now?" The innocent question hung in the air. Letty's eyes filled with tears as she hugged him closer. "I've always been like your mom, sweetheart," she whispered, "and I always will be." Martin watched this tender moment between his son and adopted sister, and I saw something shift in his expression. A recognition of what had been there all along, right under his nose. Within 48 hours, Andrea's last-ditch effort to control the narrative backfired spectacularly. She'd posted on social media, claiming she was the victim of a vindictive family conspiracy, but the venue released a public statement about serious tampering with dietary instructions that made her look even worse. Her lawyer contacted our lawyer with evidence we'd compiled. The security footage, the contents of her clutch, the recorded garden conversation, where she'd admitted researching Leo's allergy. Her social media posts were screenshot and preserved before she could delete them. The story began appearing in local news outlets, with headlines about wedding reception poisoning attempts. Every detail made Andrea look more calculated and dangerous. People who'd known her began coming forward with their own stories of manipulative behavior. Former friends shared screenshots of text messages where she'd complained about Martin's baggage and suggested Leo needed stronger boundaries. The woman I'd welcomed into our family was revealed to be someone none of us had really known. At the kitchen table that afternoon, Martin looked up from signing official statements with tears in his eyes. His signature was shaky, but his resolve was firm. "I almost lost the most important person in my life," he said, watching Leo color quietly beside Letty. That evening, Martin sat across from Letty at my kitchen table while Leo played with his red toy car nearby. "I need to apologize," Martin began, his voice heavy with emotion. "Not just for bringing Andrea into our lives, but for being blind to what was right in front of me all along." Letty looked up from the documents she was organizing. "You don't need to apologize for falling in love," she said gently. "You deserve to find happiness." But Martin shook his head. "I was looking for someone to complete our family, when our family was already complete. You've been Leo's mother in every way that matters since the day he was born. You've been taking care of all of us." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm asking if you'll stay, not as a placeholder or convenience, but as the person who already chose us every single day." Leo looked up from his car and smiled. "Does this mean Letty gets to stay forever?" I watched this moment unfold, my heart full despite everything we'd been through. Later, as I cleared the dinner dishes, I looked at the empty vase on my dining room table. The flowers from the wedding were long gone, thrown away with all the other reminders of that terrible night. But I knew I'd never look at a centerpiece the same way again. The doorbell rang, and I went to answer it. A courier stood there with an envelope of signed statements that would close this dark chapter and hopefully open a brighter one for all of us.